You ever have that moment where someone looks you dead in the eye and says something so outrageously wrong, so jaw-droppingly arrogant, that your brain just stalls? Like you're waiting for the punchline. Waiting for the just kidding. But it never comes. That was me, standing on the porch of my own cabin, the one my grandfather built with his bare hands, listening to Brenda McNaught, president of the newly formed Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association, tell me I had 30 days to demolish it. 30 days. Or else. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Because you're not going to believe how this played out. Hell, I barely believe it and I lived it. This story? It's proof that sometimes, a quiet man with the right knowledge and a long memory can move mountains, or, in this case, flatten an entire HOA. That cabin wasn't just a structure. It was a legacy. Tucked on a private peninsula on Whisper Wind Lake, built from local timber, with a wide stone chimney and a front porch that had seen more sunrises than Brenda McNaughts had seen hot dinners. My grandfather, a surveyor by trade and artist by heart, had carved it into the land in the 1940s. He knew how to read land like a poet reads lines. He didn't just buy a plot, he bought history. And as it turns out, a lot more land than anyone realized. Every summer of my childhood played out on those boards. I learned to fish off that dock, track constellations from the roof, split wood with tools older than me. After he passed, it became my sanctuary. I'm an engineer, a problem solver. And that cabin, that silence, was the antidote to the noise of my job. It was rustic, modest, but it was solid. It had dignity, which is probably why it offended Brenda so much. Lakeview Estates popped up about a decade ago across the inlet. A copy-paste suburban fever dream, McMansions lined up like frowning clones, every lawn the same height, every mailbox regulation beige. I didn't pay them any mind. My property wasn't part of their development. It was separated by water, pine trees, and common sense. Or so I thought. Then came the flyer, neon-colored and laughably self-important, stuffed in my mailbox, announcing the formation of the Lakeview Estates HOA, and listing out community standards like they'd taken over a military base. I crumpled it and tossed it. Didn't apply to me. I wasn't in their zip code of authority. Or so I thought. A week later she arrived. Brenda McNaught. Pulled up my long gravel driveway in a pristine white SUV that looked allergic to dust. She stepped out like a general surveying a battlefield, designer sunglasses, perfectly bleached smile, and a posture that said I've never been told no in my life. She looked at my cabin like it was something scraped off her shoe. "Mr. Jensen," she called out, not asked, declared like it was a summons. "That's me," I said, stepping onto the porch, wiping grease from my hands. "I'd been working on the old water pump. Can I help you? I'm Brenda McNaught, president of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association." She paused like that should mean something. I gave her nothing. Just silence and a raised brow. She gestured vaguely toward the cabin, her gold bracelets jangling with righteous indignation. "Your structure here has become a matter of concern for the association." "Concern?" I asked. "What kind of concern?" She sniffed. "It's an eyesore. And more importantly, it's obstructing the community's designated access to the lake." That was news to me. "My grandfather owned this land for over 70 years, I said evenly. "He built this place himself. There's no community access here. It's private property. The public launch is 2 miles down the shore." She gave a theatrical sigh, the kind you practice in front of a mirror. "Mr. Jensen, Lakeview Estates is an exclusive community. We have certain standards. We're developing a community dock and recreation area. And your cabin is in the way. It's also not up to code. Likely unpermitted." She looked around with open disdain, like the chimney might collapse from shame. "Unpermitted?" I laughed. "Lady, my grandfather wrote the local building codes. He was a licensed surveyor. You're standing on the most legal structure on this side of the lake." But she didn't flinch. Brenda had that blind confidence you only get when you've never faced real consequences. She pulled a folded notice from her handbag. "You have 30 days to bring the property into compliance. Or remove the structure." That's when my brain short-circuited. I just stared at her, waiting for the smirk. For the just kidding. It never came. And in that moment, calm, cold, quiet, I knew exactly what I had to do. They said my cabin was an eyesore. Let that sink in. This hand-built, timber-framed heirloom, weathered but proud, had more soul in a single beam than all of Lakeview Estates combined. I felt that familiar slow burn start deep in my chest. The one that always came before a long night of hard thinking, or a very direct confrontation. "Mrs. McNaught," I said, voice calm in a way that made people nervous. "This cabin is structurally sound, fully permitted, and has stood on this land longer than any house in your development. There is no public or community easement here. I suggest you double-check your plat maps and your facts." She actually scoffed. "Our lawyers have reviewed everything," she said with the brittle confidence of someone used to bluffing their way through reality. "The original plat for Lakeview Estates clearly shows a utility and access easement running directly through this area." She gestured vaguely toward my small stretch of private shoreline, like she expected it to disappear under her command. "It's for the betterment of the entire community. Your grandfather was likely grandfathered in, so to speak. But that courtesy doesn't extend to subsequent owners, especially those who let the property fall into disrepair." Disrepair? I'd reshingled the roof last fall. Replaced 2 windows the spring before that. The place was cleaner than half the homes in her development. "There is no disrepair," I said flatly. "That's a matter of opinion," she sniffed. "And our opinion, as the HOA representing the collective homeowners, is that this structure needs to go. It's impacting property values. It's unsightly. And it's blocking rightful access." Then she produced a crisply folded letter from her handbag and handed it to me like a traffic ticket. "This is a formal notice from the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. You have 30 days to demolish the structure and clear the area. Failure to comply will result in HOA action to remove it, and you will be billed for all associated costs, plus significant daily fines." I took the letter. My hand was steady even if my blood wasn't. The sheer, unfiltered arrogance of it was stunning. Demolish my grandfather's cabin? My cabin? So Brenda McNaugh's little club could have a shortcut to the water? I unfolded the paper and skimmed the legal jargon. Threats, fines, invented bylaws, phantom easements, none of which had any bearing on my deed, my land, or my life. The letter was signed by McNaught and 2 other names I didn't recognize, probably her pet board members. I looked up. She stood there, face frozen in smug certainty. She genuinely believed she held all the cards. That I was just some local oddball she could roll over with bureaucracy and polished shoes. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was who my grandfather had been, or what he'd put in place decades ago. The shock was already fading. What replaced it was a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was an attack on legacy, on decency. I carefully folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. McNaught. And I think you're going to regret it." Her smile sharpened like a blade. "I doubt that, Mr. Jensen. The HOA always gets what it wants. We have very good lawyers." And with that, she turned, climbed into her absurdly clean SUV, and kicked up a storm of gravel as she drove off, leaving nothing but dust and arrogance behind. I stood there for a long time, letting the quiet of the lake settle around me. A stillness before the storm. She had given me 30 days. She had no idea what I could find in 30 hours. The first thing I did was make a pot of strong coffee and pull out my grandfather's old files. He hadn't just been a surveyor. He was a cartographer of his world, a methodical archivist of every deed, permit, survey, and letter related to his land. His filing cabinet was a cathedral of documentation, a testament to a man who believed in proof over promise. The deed to my peninsula was right where I expected, clear, indisputable, with no mention of any easement. The attached survey maps were beautiful, hand-drawn elevation lines, boundary notes in his tight script, and zero indication of any right-of-way for Lakeview Estates. If Brenda's lawyers had reviewed anything, they were either wildly incompetent or happily lying to prop up her fantasy. My guess? A mix of both. But as I kept flipping through the pages, something caught my eye. A small note in the corner of one survey, Tract B, see file number 217, Whisper Wind Holdings. Curiosity kicked in. I opened the referenced file. This one was thick, much thicker than mine. Inside, dusty deeds, ancient plats, and a 99-year lease agreement. Dated 1924. The lessor? My great-grandfather. The lessee? A timber company long gone. The land? Tract B. And when I overlaid the legal description onto a modern GIS map, I felt a slow smile spread across my face. Tract B was Lakeview Estates. Every last inch of it. Every manicured lawn. Every brick driveway. Every one of Brenda's precious cookie-cutter houses was sitting on land leased from my family. And the lease? It expired last year. I called Arthur Jenkins, our family's attorney. A bulldog of a man with a mind like a bear trap. Arthur, I said, I think we've got a situation. I emailed him scans of the lease, the deed, the maps, and my notes. 10 minutes later he called back. Michael, he said, half laughing, half stunned, do you have any idea what you're sitting on? Getting an idea. This lease is ironclad. If it expired last year and no one renewed it, no renegotiation, no extensions, then every person in that development is technically a trespasser, including your HOA friend. You're the landlord of the entire neighborhood. And she's threatening you? She gave me 30 days to tear down my own cabin. There was a pause. Then a whistle. She just kicked a sleeping giant. And you, my boy, are holding the alarm clock. Meanwhile, Brenda wasn't backing off. The letters started arriving, official-looking notices of violation from the HOA. One claimed my cabin's exterior stain was non-compliant. It was the same weathered cedar finish it had worn proudly for over 30 years. Another cited unmaintained landscaping, referring, apparently, to the wildflowers and pine needles I considered part of its natural charm. Each letter came with a threat of escalating daily fines. Then the passive-aggressive tactics started. Someone began dumping trash bags just outside my driveway gate. Twice I found nails scattered across the gravel. Small acts, annoying, petty, meant to intimidate. I documented everything. Photos, dates, timestamps. I installed discrete, motion-activated security cameras along the approach to my cabin, each feeding to a secure cloud server. Engineering background came in handy. One afternoon, a nervous-looking young man from a local tree service arrived. Said the HOA had hired him to remove hazardous trees near the shoreline, right where my grandfather's old maple stood, shading the porch just right. I kept it civil but firm. He was on private land. I showed him the survey markers. Told him any tree removal would be considered trespass and vandalism. That I'd already spoken to the sheriff about unauthorized access. He apologized quickly and left, clearly grateful to be out of whatever mess Brenda had pulled him into. This was escalation. Slow, deliberate, designed to provoke. Brenda was chipping away, hoping to shake me loose. But she didn't realize I'd already found the bedrock. The title search came back flawless. My family trust held clear ownership of Tract B. The only encumbrance, the old lease, had expired. Arthur began drafting legal notices. We weren't just going to tell Brenda to back off the cabin. We were going to tell every homeowner in Lakeview Estates that they were now living on land they didn't legally control, and that any permission to remain would come from me. And it wouldn't come cheap. Not under Brenda's leadership. The irony was almost too good. She wanted my little sliver of the lake. She was about to find out I owned the entire pie, and she wasn't even invited to the table. It wasn't just vindication I felt, it was legacy. A rising, unshakable sense that I was stepping into the path my grandfather had paved with purpose and foresight. He'd understood the true value of land. And he'd protected it. Now it was my turn. Brenda's 30-day deadline was drawing close. I let it. I wanted her to feel powerful right up until the fall. Arthur Jenkins, my lawyer, was old school in the best way, sharp suit, sharper mind, and a bulldog's tenacity hiding behind a gentleman's charm. When he'd assembled all the documentation, my grandfather's records, the title search, the expired lease, and my thick file on Brenda's harassment, including security footage of what looked suspiciously like her matching white SUV pausing near my driveway just before another fresh batch of nails, He sat back in his chair, steepled his fingers and exhaled slowly. "Michael," he said, voice calm and tinged with admiration, "this isn't just a slam dunk. It's a legal masterpiece, courtesy of your grandfather. The reversion clause is clear. Upon expiration or breach, the land and all permanent improvements revert to the lessor." I blinked. "All improvements?" Arthur nodded. "Homes, roads, sidewalks, everything." I felt my jaw tighten. "So, theoretically, I own their houses." He smiled. "Theoretically. And practically. Yes." He leaned forward. "Now that's an aggressive stance to take out of the gate. Legally, what you're entitled to do is inform them that the lease has expired, that they're occupying the land without valid agreement, and that continuing to do so will require a new arrangement with you. Or they vacate." He paused. "Given the behavior of your friendly HOA president, I doubt a polite letter will suffice." And right on cue, Brenda overplayed her hand. About a week before her demolition deadline, I received a certified letter. Not from the HOA this time, but from a law firm I recognized as the kind that usually handled billboard accidents and loud divorces. In HOA disputes, they were the go-to bulldogs for bullies. It was a cease and desist. It claimed my cabin was unpermitted and obstruction of community access, and stated that unless I demolished it by the deadline, the HOA had obtained a court order to enter the property and remove it themselves. They even attached a quote from a demolition contractor, wildly inflated, of course. I stared at the letter, stunned not by the threat but by the sheer gall. Arthur, when I called him, was unimpressed. "They're claiming they got a court order," I said, "without notifying me. Ex parte. Is that even legal?" Arthur chuckled. "Not for something like this. Highly unlikely. It's a bluff. Or Brenda found a clerk who didn't know better and slipped them a doctored plat. Either way, this is the overreach we needed. This isn't just harassment anymore. It's a documented attempt to destroy private property under false pretenses. And the entity making the threat is itself trespassing." He was right. Brenda's hubris had finally outpaced her influence. She believed so completely in her own imagined authority, she'd handed us the very rope she'd hang with. This was bigger now. This wasn't just about saving a cabin or defending a title. This was about exposing the rotten foundation beneath her empire of control and conformity. So I asked Arthur about the nuclear option. Not just renegotiating leases. What if I exercised the reversion clause? Took back the land. All of it. Forced them to buy or lease from me directly. On my terms. Arthur hesitated, not out of doubt but caution. "It's drastic. Evicting an entire neighborhood? Optics could get messy. But legally? You're on bedrock. And yes, you'd be well within your rights to issue removal notices or to charge new lease fees per lot. Offering fair market purchase options might be the softer route." "But Brenda won't bend," I said. "She'll lie, posture, stir up the other homeowners. She'll paint herself the martyr and me the monster." He nodded. "Then let's be methodical. Let the facts crush the fiction." I agreed. "Let's prepare every contingency. But if the HOA continues this crusade of belligerence, I want the option to erase it completely. Let them stay, sure. But on my terms. Without Brenda McNaught and her cronies anywhere near power." Arthur got to work. He verified there was no court order on file, no demolition permit, no judicial motion, nothing. The HOA's legal team had either been duped or were in on the scam. He then prepared a full legal package. A formal notice of lease expiration, addressed to the HOA and every homeowner in Lakeview Estates. A statement of land ownership, backed by the title search and lease documents. Copies of the 1924 lease, with the reversion clause highlighted. A cease and desist demanding all harassment against me and my property immediately stop. The next step was simple: deliver it. And watch the foundation Brenda built start to crack. The legal package also included an offer. One last, fair off-ramp. The HOA could dissolve, and from there, individual homeowners would be free to approach me directly. They'd have two choices: purchase their specific lot at a fair appraised value, minus the land which I already owned. This focused on the value of their structure, or negotiate a new long-term ground lease directly with me. Reasonable, lawful, humane. But it came with a strict deadline. The homeowners had a set window to respond collectively, affirmatively. Any further hostile action or failure to respond would trigger formal eviction proceedings for the entire development. And to deliver that bombshell? We chose the perfect setting. Brenda had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting, posted discreetly on their community bulletin board. I could just make it out with binoculars from the attic window of my cabin. The topic? Final action regarding the non-compliant property at One Lidge Peninsula. My cabin. She'd planned a public victory lap. She had no idea she was setting the stage for her own public execution. She wanted a fight. She was about to get a war. But the outcome was already written, etched in the foresight of a surveyor with a steel spine and a sense of legacy. My grandfather. The night of the meeting came with a crisp snap in the air, the kind that hinted at the first frost. Poetic. The clubhouse was new, oversized, and draped in beige siding like a nervous debutante. The parking lot brimmed with luxury SUVs and smug sedans. I dressed in a clean work shirt and jeans, a conscious contrast to the HOA board's expected country club polish. Arthur, composed in a dark suit, met me at the entrance with his old leather briefcase humming with authority. "Ready, Michael?" he asked, a flicker of amusement behind his eyes. "Showtime," I replied. The inside buzzed with anxious energy, some people irritated, others just curious. Around 50 or 60 homeowners sat in rows, some clutching coffee, some already whispering. At the front, Brenda McNaught held court behind a podium, flanked by the board, a woman with a severe haircut, the secretary I guessed, and a balding, uncomfortable-looking man, likely the treasurer. Brenda's voice echoed through a microphone, full of practiced concern and sharpened falsity. "Despite our repeated good-faith efforts to resolve this issue amicably," she said, "Mr. Jensen has remained uncooperative, ignoring community rights and allowing a dangerous, unsightly structure to remain in full view." Some heads nodded in agreement, especially in the front rows. Her loyalists. She hadn't seen us enter. Arthur cleared his throat, just enough to interrupt, calm but commanding. "Excuse me, Madam President," he said. "May we speak before you continue mischaracterizing Mr. Jensen's position?" Heads turned. Brenda blinked, faltered, clearly not expecting me to show up, let alone with legal counsel. Who are you?" she asked, clutching the podium. "I'm Arthur Jenkins," Arthur said, stepping forward. "Counsel for Mr. Michael Jensen, the owner of the property you're discussing. And he has every right to be heard, especially when his rights are being so blatantly misrepresented." Brenda flushed, her voice rising. "This is outrageous." Security. There was no security, just a couple of HOA volunteers in polos who looked more like confused little league coaches than enforcers. Now, Brenda," I said, stepping up beside Arthur, voice calm. "No need for theatrics. We're just here to share some important information. Information that affects every person in this room." I turned to the homeowners. "Information," I said, "that you all should have known. That your HOA should have told you. Long ago." Murmurs rippled through the room. Brenda sputtered. "You can't just, this is a violation. That shack of yours is coming down." "Actually, Mrs. McNaught," Arthur interrupted smoothly, flipping open his briefcase, "the issue tonight isn't Mr. Jensen's cabin. It's this." He pulled out a rolled-up document, a high-resolution reproduction of my great-grandfather's original survey map, overlaid with the modern plat of Lakeview Estates. He unfurled it dramatically. "This," he said, "is a map showing the actual ownership of the land beneath your community." Then he produced a yellowed document, protected in a clear sleeve. "And this is the 99-year lease agreement, dated 1924. The lessor, Mr. Jensen's great-grandfather. The lessee, a long-defunct timber company. The lease expired last year. It was never renewed." The room fell into stunned silence. Brenda stared at the documents, jaw twitching, mouth moving but forming no words. "That's preposterous," she finally snapped. "We all have deeds. This is HOA land." Someone from the back shouted, "Wait, What does that mean for us? Arthur's tone was clinical but firm. You all hold deeds to your homes, yes, but the land beneath those homes was leased, not owned. When the developer, Lakeview Development Corp., filed for bankruptcy, they left no successors. The land, as per Clause 17b, reverted to the lessor, Mr. Jensen's family trust. He let the weight of it hang. That includes all permanent improvements, homes, roads, the clubhouse you're sitting in. I stepped forward again. What that means, folks, is simple, I said. You've all been living on my land for the past year, without a lease. Technically, you're trespassing. The room exploded. Shouts, gasp, panic, disbelief. Brenda was pale as a ghost. Her grip on the podium had turned her knuckles white. This is a lie. A trick, she shrieked, but her voice cracked. Arthur calmly held up the lease again. It's no trick, Mrs. McNaught. It's law. I held up my own stack of documents, letting the pages fan out deliberately. It's called due diligence, I said, voice calm but razor-edged. Something you and your board clearly failed to do before launching your little campaign to steal private property for your so-called community access. Then, methodically, I laid it all out, point by point. The threatening letters about my fully permitted cabin. The false claims of a non-existent easement. The fabricated violation notices. The quiet but pointed attempt to have my grandfather's maples cut down. The nails in my driveway. And finally, the audacious, fraudulent claim of a court order for demolition. Each accusation came with backup. Photos, timestamps, certified mail, all projected one after another onto a portable screen Arthur had quietly set up. By the time I finished, the mood in the room had shifted from confusion, to horror, to fury. But it wasn't aimed at me. She said that cabin was illegal, someone shouted. She told us he was a troublemaker, cried another. The board, Brenda's loyal lieutenants, looked like they wanted to sink into the floor. The stern-faced secretary wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The treasurer's face had turned blotchy and pale. Brenda herself looked like she might faint. So here's the situation, I continued, my voice cutting through the clamor. Brenda McNaught, in her role as HOA president, has not only harassed me, but misled all of you. She's exposed every homeowner in this room to massive legal and financial risk. Her actions, supposedly on your behalf, were malicious and built on a complete misunderstanding, no disregard, for the legal foundation of this entire development. I paused. Let it settle. My lawyer has prepared a package for each homeowner. Inside you'll find everything. The expired lease, the ownership documents, the evidence of harassment, and, most importantly, a path forward. Arthur and a paralegal began handing out sealed envelopes row by row. You have 2 weeks to dissolve the current HOA. Remove Brenda McNaught and her complicit board. Then you can come to the table, directly, to negotiate either a fair purchase of your lot or a new long-term ground lease with clear, reasonable terms. My tone hardened. But let me be clear, if I receive one more threat, one more nail in my driveway, one more piece of trash thrown on my property, I will begin eviction proceedings against every single home in Lakeview Estates. My cabin stays. Your HOA, as it currently exists, doesn't. The choice is yours. The silence that followed was thick and absolute, broken only by the rustling of opened envelopes and the dull hum of disbelief. Brenda McNaught just stared. Her kingdom was crumbling around her in real time. And the look on her face? Worth more than any Lakeview money could buy. What happened after that meeting could only be described as biblical. Arthur and I left the clubhouse before the fireworks began. We didn't need to stay for the implosion. Word got back to me within hours. Screaming matches, homeowners turning on Brenda, people demanding her immediate resignation. The same board members who had nodded smugly during her speech now tried to disavow her, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Their names were on every letter. Within 48 hours, Arthur received a call from a lawyer representing a newly formed ad hoc homeowners committee. Brenda McNaught and her entire board had resigned. Effective immediately. The HOA was, for all practical purposes, dead. The committee was humble, bordering on desperate. They apologized profusely. They wanted to meet. They didn't argue. They understood the power I now held. Brenda's fantasy of a courtroom battle evaporated. Her lawyers, after reviewing the documents, copies the new committee had sent them, likely told her exactly how deeply she'd stepped in it. Any lawsuit would be expensive, futile, and might even open her up to personal liability. She vanished almost overnight. A week later, her signature white SUV was spotted leaving the neighborhood, packed to the roof. Rumor had it she moved out of state, maybe hoping to start fresh. Hopefully far away from any HOA board. One can only hope. The negotiations with the new committee went far more smoothly than I expected. Most of the homeowners were relieved. They admitted, some sheepishly, some bitterly, that they'd never liked how aggressive Brenda had become. But they'd felt powerless to oppose her. Now that she was gone, they just wanted clarity and peace. Arthur and I worked with them to establish fair market values for their lots. Legally, the houses had reverted to my family trust when the lease expired. I could have demanded rent back pay or taken a much harder line. But I wasn't interested in being a slumlord or displacing families. This was never about revenge. It was about restoring respect and rights. So I gave them two choices. Buy their lots, at fair appraised value, becoming full, legitimate landowners. Sign a new ground lease, long-term, stable, with reasonable annual payments, and zero tolerance for the resurrection of any overreaching HOA. Most chose to buy. It was a financial shock for some, sure, but it gave them real ownership. For those who couldn't afford it, the lease offered long-term peace of mind. Within 6 months, Lakeview Estates had fully transitioned. The old HOA was formally dissolved. The roads, trails, and shared spaces, which technically belonged to me, were transferred to a simple maintenance trust. The trust was managed by a small, elected board with clearly defined and strictly limited powers. Their only job, essential upkeep. No more aesthetic committees. No more mailbox citations. No more Brenda. As for my cabin, it remained exactly where it had always been. Untouched. Unbothered. The view from the porch was even sweeter now. Not because the water had changed, but because the air across the inlet was clear. So, respectful. I even got a few neighborly waves from folks on the water now and then. People who, once freed from Brenda's tyranny, just wanted to enjoy life quietly, like I had been trying to do all along. That community access Brenda had tried to bully out of me? It never happened. The shoreline stayed natural. They used the public boat launch just like everyone else. Looking back, it's incredible how far this all went, how a woman's entitlement led her to try to bulldoze a man's legacy, and instead handed him the deed to her entire world. My grandfather, the meticulous surveyor, would have loved the symmetry of it all. His dusty old records ended up shaping a future he'd never lived to see. I didn't plan to own a neighborhood. I didn't set out to dismantle an HOA. All I wanted was to save my grandfather's cabin, my sanctuary. But Brenda McNaught forced my hand. And in doing so, she handed me the keys to her kingdom. She underestimated the quiet engineer. She underestimated the grandson of the man who built the land she tried to claim. And she learned the hard way. Always check who owns the ground beneath your feet before you start making demands. Crazy story, right? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your wildest HOA horror story. Thanks for tuning in.